All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. So today we're doing the first of a three-part webinar series, kind of as a continuation from an event that we did last week with the MIT Age Lab that's regarding aging, long-term care, estate planning, and all things that everyone gets super excited about as we grow old. So today, though, for those who don't know me, my name is Ashley Hoy. I'm a financial advisor here at Bickling Financial Services, and we are so fortunate to have Christine Booten of Counsel from Myrick on today's call. Today, we will be discussing long-term care and MassHealth basics. I think that everyone, regardless of your wealth or your income, everyone gets a bit concerned about, can the state take my home? How am I going to pay for health care? I know someone who's been through this before, and it can be stressful. So Christine, though, works closely with elder clients to design an estate plan, which will provide advanced asset protection in the event of an elder's future application for MassHealth benefits to pay for nursing home care. She also develops crisis planning strategies for the application to enable an elder to financially qualify for MassHealth when the advanced planning was not previously done. Christine also represents families in court to obtain guardianship and conservatorship of adults with disabilities who are unable to make personal, financial, or medical decisions. Christine also advises parents on special needs planning, including the creation of third-party supplemental needs trusts to protect public benefits in the event of a child's inheritance, and also first-party special needs trusts to shelter settlement proceeds or other windfalls that an individual with disabilities may have received. Lastly, Christine also probates wills and intestate estates and guides personal representatives and trustees through very complex estate administration and trust administration processes. One quick item before Christine gets started is that please save all questions until the end of today's webinar. There is a chat feature here, so please feel free to type in your question into the chat, and we will be sure to address that at the end. And with that, Christine, welcome to today. Thank you so much for your help.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. I'm very happy to be here. So we're going to start chatting a little bit about MassHealth today, and we're going to start from the ground up. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of MassHealth. We're going to walk through a little bit of the application process, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do in advance to try to protect your assets should it come time when either you or a spouse may need to enter a nursing home and apply for MassHealth to pay for it. So first of all, I just want to establish, I'd like to establish the sort of the ground definition here. So there are two programs that provide care for people who are in long-term care facilities, otherwise known as nursing homes. So one is Medicaid and one is Medicare. So these are two different programs. And Medicaid is a federal program which is implemented differently by every state. So here in Massachusetts, our Medicaid program is called MassHealth. So I'm going to be referring to that program by MassHealth during this webinar, and you'll know that I'm talking about Medicaid. So what is the difference between Medicare and MassHealth? So Medicare is a government health insurance program for elders 65 and over and younger people with disabilities. It pays for doctor visits. It pays for hospital stays. There's Part D Medicare that covers prescription medication. And so, Medicare will also pay, if you have gone to a hospital for an acute event, like you had a fall, and you can't go home right away, you need to have some rehab to learn how to climb stairs or get yourself back into a better physical condition. So you might go for a stay of rehabilitation, and Medicare will pay up to 100 days for that rehabilitation to occur. Now, often, especially if you're an older person, that rehabilitation takes place in a skilled nursing facility. So a lot of confusion comes from, well, am I on Medicare or Medicaid? Because I'm in a nursing home, but If you're just there short term for rehab and you're going to go home afterward, you're most likely on Medicare. So because Medicare does not pay for long-term stays in a skilled nursing facility. Someone who's going to stay in the skilled nursing facility because they can't go home because they don't have the physical ability to do that anymore, their stay at the nursing home is called custodial care because they're getting bathing and dressing and feeding and all that kind of help that people who are there for rehab and they're going to go home, they don't get that. So that's the basic difference, basic explanation of Medicare. And then long-term care, MassHealth, it's also a federal health insurance program, but as I said, it's implemented differently by every state. So the financial eligibility rules here in Massachusetts are different from the financial eligibility rules in Florida. So MassHealth will pay for long-term stays in a skilled nursing facility, but you have to meet not only medical requirements to be there, but you also have to meet asset and income rules. When someone is on long-term care MassHealth, they have to recertify for financial eligibility every year. So you have to show bank statements and report, if you had any financial changes. So the state can be assured that you are still financially eligible. And just to know, an individual who is on MassHealth can also receive Medicare at the same time, because MassHealth will want Medicare to keep paying for you, because then that's less of the sort of doctor visits and acute medical care that MassHealth is going to have to pay for. So why do we talk early about doing advanced long-term care planning? So it's because it can be a very it can be a big turning point in the life of an elder. So if somebody can't go home anymore or can't function at home anymore independently and needs that 24/7 skilled nursing care, which is, like we said, bathing, dressing, feeding, taking medications, if they're not safe to be around, a kitchen environment, or they need that 24/7 supervision, the private pay rate here in Massachusetts is approximately $14,000 to $18,000 a month. We are seeing some facilities now that are going up towards the $20,000 month mark, and that's for private pay. So the options for paying for that care is usually private pay from the individual's assets and income, qualifying for MassHealth to pay for the long term, or if the individual happens to have a long-term care insurance policy. So we sometimes see people with long-term care insurance, and that will cover a portion of the nursing home stay, making it more affordable. But one thing that we do see is, as people age, the premiums go up every year, and it's for many people at some point the premiums become too expensive and they let the plan go, and so then they no longer have the long-term care insurance coverage. So when you're applying for MassHealth, the applicant who's going into the facility, you can have a maximum of $2,000 in countable assets. And if you're married, your spouse who's going to be staying at home can have a maximum, as of 2026, of $162,660 in countable assets. And we're going to talk in a minute about what countable assets are. And you should know that total for the community spouse, that goes up a little bit every year. But the $2,000, that has been in place for decades now. So that has not gone up. That asset limit for the applicant has not gone up. So if you do advanced planning, and by advance, I mean planning while you are still healthy and you have no anticipated need to enter a nursing home, or that you'll need that kind of care within the next 5 years. And we'll talk about that. It's called the 5-year look back. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the advanced planning would occur, before the 5 years. And it's important to do that because it does help for individuals and married couples with higher assets to be able to comply with those limits of the 2,000 and the 162. It will help you to, comply with those limits while still basically preserving the assets and qualifying for MassHealth at the same time. So the key is the advanced planning. more than 5 years before you're going to need to submit that MassHealth application if you're in the nursing home. And of course, nobody knows when that's going to be. So the critical point is to apply early before you need it. And don't wait for when you do need it, because then it's going to be too late once you're diagnosed with that diagnosis of dementia and you're starting to fail. You're not going to make that 5-year look back. So early planning while you're still healthy and don't think you need it, that's the time to do it. And when we're talking about advanced planning, we're talking about trust planning. So points to know about MassHealth. As we said, these are the 2026 asset limits: 2,000 for the applicant, 162, 660 for the community spouse. 5-year look back. What that means in practice is that when an applicant submits their application for MassHealth benefits for a nursing home, MassHealth looks back 5 years from that day to see what that applicant did with their money. And that means they are going to ask you for just a full panoply of all your financial documents that support what you did with your money in the last 5 years. So we have to give them up to 5 years of all of your bank statements for open and closed accounts. If you sold a house, or transferred a house to somebody else, even if it was, if you transferred it to a child or whoever you transferred it to, you have to show the deeds and the proof. And what they're basically looking for is to see, what did you do with your money in the last 5 years? Did you take an asset and transfer it to another person or an entity and you did not get fair market value back? And if that happened, they're going to say that's a disqualifying transfer. And that's going to cause a problem for eligibility. To protect your assets, well, I guess so if you do have a disqualifying transfer, then what do you do? So there's two things that can happen. The person or the entity to whom you transferred the money can give it back to you as the applicant, and then you have to spend it down allowably to get yourself under the 2,000, and then you can apply. If that person has spent the money and they don't have it to give back to you, then what MassHealth will do is say, well, otherwise your application looks good, so we will approve you, but first you're going to have a penalty period. And so they calculate the amount of the penalty period by the amount that you gave away and didn't get the fair market value back, divided by the average cost. What MassHealth determines is the average cost of nursing home care per day in Massachusetts, which I think now is, I don't know, it's in the upper 400s. And then whatever the result of that is, that's the number of days that MassHealth will not cover you. And if you want to go into the nursing home, you're going to have to figure out a way to private pay for that, which is difficult because you have by that time spent yourself down to 2,000 and you don't have it. So we try everything we do to avoid that penalty period. So to protect assets, what we're looking at is revocable trust planning. And we want to set up and fund those trusts. That means put assets into that trust 5 years before the applicant is going to need to apply for MassHealth. That's one technique we use. Another technique we use, if that advanced planning has not been done, is called a single premium immediate annuity. This is crisis planning. If no planning was done and someone has to go in immediately and apply for Medicaid, we look at their assets and we can, especially if it's a married couple, we can apply for this particular or purchase this type of annuity that converts the excess assets over the 162 and the 2,000, converts those excess assets into a stream of income for the community spouse, because MassHealth says the community spouse can keep all their own income. And then the applicant is able to qualify, and then the assets pay back as income to the spouse, because this, as we'll talk about in a little bit, the spouse is going to have a reduced income pool. They're only going to have their own income. They're no longer going to have their spouse's income. So this annuity coming in every month is usually very helpful to the community spouse. Okay, so the basic asset rules. If you're married, MassHealth looks at that married couple as one pot of assets. They don't just say, okay, what assets do the applicant have? And then the community spouse, they can keep all their own assets. No, the assets are in one big pot, regardless of which spouse's name is on that particular asset. So the non-countable assets, what MassHealth is not going to look at when they're determining that applicant's financial eligibility, is the primary residence if the spouse still lives in it. And that has an equity cap of $1,130,000. That also goes up a little bit every year, but as long as your house is assessed by the town, usually at that amount or under it, you should be okay. One vehicle per couple. If both members of the couple have vehicles, you have to sell one because you can only have one. Term life insurance policies. Those are non-countable because they don't have a cash value. You can't cash them in. The only time you can use it is once you are gone. So that is non-countable because you can't turn it into cash. A whole life policy they'll allow, but the value has to be $1,500 maximum. I've never seen one that low, but that's what MassHealth allows you to keep.
I haven't either, Christine, just to say.
Good to know. Someone's seen one in the wild.
Not that low.
So they can also have prepaid irrevocable funeral plans. And so these are a very useful way if you're married to spend down about $30,000, or if you're single, you can do about $15,000 or $16,000. You set them up at the funeral home. All funeral homes know very well these plans. They do them all the time for people qualifying for MassHealth. It has to be irrevocable, so you can't change your mind and get the money back. So it's prepaid, irrevocable. And you need a statement of goods and services. You're going to pick out everything for the funeral ahead of time, the number of death certificates you want, the casket you want, the type of transportation you want. It all has to be outlined, signed. You have that statement of goods and services, and then your pre-needs contract, and that goes into MassHealth for them to look at. On the statement of goods and services, when you're purchasing everything, you cannot have purchases on that document for flowers, a funeral meal, or donations to a church. So MassHealth will often push back on those three things. So MassHealth also allows you to set up a bank burial account at the bank of your choice with a maximum of $1,500 in there, although it can grow over time, and that's fine. And that can cover the flowers, the food, and if you want to give a donation to the clergy, you can pay it from there. The other non-countable asset is income-producing property. So if you have a rental home and you're renting it out, MassHealth would say, great, it's earning income for you, so we're going to let you keep it. We're not going to count it against you for eligibility purposes. Not all purposes, but for eligibility purposes, won't be counted against you as long as the spouse going into the nursing home gets their portion of the rent, of the net rent. And that's going to be added to their other income because that spouse is going to owe their own income towards their care at the nursing home. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what do we do if we've got too many countable assets? So one of the things we'll say is, well, the spouse is staying at home, home repairs. Does it need a new roof? Does it need new windows? Get all of that done before we apply for MassHealth, because that's all going to be allowed. Out-of-pocket medical expenses, those are allowed. If like we said, there would only be one vehicle per couple or one per individual if you're not married. So if it's an old car and the spouse needs a new car, you can buy a new car for the community spouse. So that's another way you can allowably spend down. And then those irrevocable funeral plans that we talked about. And so people will always ask, well, can I just give it to my children? Can I give, some money to my children? And so unfortunately, in general, the answer is no. So we can't, the time for gifts is done. Those would all be considered disqualifying transfers because when you give money to somebody else, you're not getting anything back when it's a gift. The few exceptions are if you have a disabled child, you can set up a special needs trust for them, and you can fund that special needs trust with no 5-year look back worries. You could fund it, and then soon after that, you can qualify for you can apply for Medicaid, and it's okay if you have a disabled child. So moving on, so 5-year look back. So we were talking about this a minute ago. So again, it applies to transfers of assets from the applicant or the spouse. So not just the person applying if they're married, from either of them, to a third person or an entity. And so what I mean by an entity is like a charitable gift, like a gift to your church, a gift to, your university. And that transfer has to be for less than fair market value. So you didn't get anything back in return that was equal to what you gave. And that transfer will be made within 5 years before the date of application to MassHealth. So when we apply, as I said, we have to give them up to 5 years of bank statements. So we, as the attorneys, we go through every single bank statement and we mark off the amounts of about $1,000 or more that were either distributions or withdrawals or payments coming out of the accounts, because that's kind of like what MassHealth is going to look at, like amounts of $1,000 lump sums, or smaller regular transfers, like every month, 250, 250, 250 coming out, and where is it going? Who got this money? So we have to document that for MassHealth and then provide them with copies of all verifications. Like if there's a payment of $15,000 and the client says, oh, because we got a new roof in, we need an invoice from the roofer on the roofer's letterhead with the date that the roofing service was provided and the address where the service was provided, so it matches the applicant's address. And then the total due, and then the proof of the payment. So all of that has to go into Medicaid to support that wasn't actually a gift, it was actually an allowable expense. And like we said, if the transfer can't be cured, if that money that was given away can't come back, they're going to deny the application and impose a penalty period. And the reason they have this look back is because MassHealth feels that people attempt to artificially impoverish themselves for the purpose of qualifying for benefits. And that is rarely the case. I mean, we see lots of cases where families have a history of giving money to grandchildren at Christmas or birthdays. And so we have to do affidavits, and we have to explain that to MassHealth to say that was not the purpose. The purpose was this 20-year history they had of giving, money to their children over holidays. So we have to explain to them it was not done for this allegedly nefarious purpose of impoverishing yourself for Medicaid. So we talked about assets and what the asset rules are. So let's look at income quickly. So on the application, you have to disclose you have to disclose the assets and the income. So MassHealth does not pay, except in rare circumstances, for the entire amount of the nursing home care. They're going to have you, the applicant, pay their income first, and then MassHealth covers whatever that applicant's income doesn't cover. So there are things, there are deductions that you are allowed to take out of your income if MassHealth approves. So everybody gets to keep $72.80 a month for their own monthly personal needs. And that has to cover haircuts, and if they want takeout or they want any special kind of foods or whatever the person in the nursing home wants, that $72.80, that's what they get per month to pay for that. If the person in the nursing home also has a private health insurance plan, like a MedX plan or a Medigap plan, MassHealth wants you to keep that, because that's less that MassHealth is going to have to pay for your medical coverage, because the other plan will kick in first. And they will let you keep from your own income enough to pay that monthly premium for the private health insurance. Sometimes we can, if we have a married couple and the one going into the nursing home has the much higher income, and the one who's staying at home maybe was a homemaker during their life, and their Social Security is pretty low, they have no pension, we can ask MassHealth to allow that spouse to keep some of the income of the spouse who's going on to Medicaid. And sometimes we get to keep some, sometimes we have to have a hearing, but that's also a possibility. Otherwise, the community spouse, the one staying at home, they can keep all of their own income. So their income does not have to go to pay for their spouse who's going into nursing home. They keep their own income. So as we said, if the community spouse's income is significantly lower than the applicant's, we can ask MassHealth for that community spouse to keep some. And sometimes we have a situation where the community spouse is actually in assisted living. When the other spouse has, gotten too ill to stay at assisted living, they have to go to the nursing home and apply for Medicaid. We have to run numbers, but we can ask MassHealth to allow that assisted living spouse to keep all of the nursing home spouse's income, because if they're in assisted living, their living expenses are going to be high. And so sometimes we have been successful with that. So the application process, we're just going to do a very high level overview of this. So it starts with the application and a lot of supporting documentation. Not only bank statements, but all your personal things like the applicant's birth certificate, if they're married, the marriage certificate, um, copies of all of the health insurance cards, copies of the Social Security approval letter every year that you get saying this is the amount you're going to get in 2026 and 2027. So they want to see those. So a lot of documentation. But once you have the application pretty much completed and you have all your supporting documentation, you can't submit it until on paper the applicant, and if there's a spouse, the spouse are under their allowable limits. So if MassHealth looks at, if you submit the bank statements and the last bank statement says your spouse, the community spouse has $180,000 in the bank, they're going to deny it because they are over their asset limit of 162. So you have to get on paper under those amounts of money. So when MassHealth looks at those bank statements, they will see, oh, okay, the applicant has 1,500 in their bank account and the spouse has 155. They're well under the limits, and then they'll take the application in. If not, they'll just be denied for being over assets. After you submit, MassHealth will send an information request because they review the application, and the worker will come up with a number of questions based on what they see in your application. And also they will plug in the Social Security numbers into their asset verification database. And they may see other accounts pop up that maybe were forgotten or lost. And they will, have questions on things that they see in the asset verification database. So you have usually 30 days to respond to all the questions in that information request. If even after you do that, MassHealth says nope, we're still not happy, and they come back to you with a denial, you have to promptly appeal all denials. There's different kinds of denials, denials based on not giving them the right paperwork and denials based on financial eligibility. We always routinely appeal all denials, even though the ones usually that are denied on the basis of lack of paperwork, we can sometimes work those out with the worker and we can just submit what's missing. And then they say, okay, well, it's not denied anymore. We're back on. Now we're going to continue with the application. So, but we do routinely appeal all denials. Otherwise, you lose your right to keep that application alive and keep it going. And just so you know, even if you do if the applicant gets approved for MassHealth, their financial eligibility is reviewed on a yearly basis. So if your initial approval letter comes through on June 1st, every year in June, you're going to get a recertification notice. And it might ask for, the last 3 months of bank statements or your current Social Security letter or whatever they ask for. It's a much shorter process, though, than the initial eligibility process. All right. Application pitfall. So these are things to have in your mind to avoid when you're in the process of submitting an application. Number one, as we said, if you get any type of a denial, failure to appeal that. That should say failure to appeal a denial, not a decision. Sorry. You have to appeal it because you can permanently lose your right to get that coverage. Even if it's something that's fixable, if you don't appeal it promptly and you let the appeal period go, even if it's fixable, it's too late. You can't go back. You have to start all over again. Providing partial documentation. So especially with bank statements, if you have an 8-page bank statement, or he'll say a 6-page bank statement, and the first 4 pages are all the balances and what went in, what went out. And the last 2 pages are just kind of that boilerplate language that you see at the back of your bank statement sometimes. And people will all the time will say, oh, the MassHealth doesn't need that. And they'll just submit the 4 pages. That's the actual, meat of the bank statement. But MassHealth says the bottom of every page says this is page 1 of 6, 2 of 6. Where's page 5 of 6 and 6 of 6? And they'll deny it on the basis of lack of verification because you did not submit entire bank statements because they're wondering what was on those last 2 statements you didn't want us to see. Did you have some big, withdrawals or something you don't want us to see? So you have to send the entire statement. So every numbered page is accounted for. and proper format of documentation. So people sometimes will say, oh, I'll get the bank statements, and they go online and they print them out, but it's just a printout. It looks like, something that you did in Excel on your computer. And so it doesn't have the bank logo on it. It doesn't have the bank's address. And so MassHealth won't accept those bank statements. And they want the statement that looks like when you used to get it in the mail, with the bank logo on top, the address of the bank, all the page numbers. And you have to go to the bank and, request those statements. Otherwise, they're going to, deny it for failure to provide proper verification. As we said, not curing disqualifying gifts or other transfers, because you're going to get that penalty period. Misunderstanding MassHealth rules on how to spend down assets. That can also be a potential loss of eligibility. So people will say, well, I had my child was my caretaker, and they were doing a lot of bathing and helping me in the house. So I just gave them, $500 every time they came. Where's the caretaker agreement? Did you get one? Did you both sign the agreement? What was the hourly rate agreed upon? How was the $500 determined? And so, it's possible to spend down assets that way, allowably, but you have to follow the rules. So that could cause a loss of eligibility. Sometimes MassHealth will approve your benefits, and they say, great, we're approving you for MassHealth, and your start date of benefits is, November 1st. And you'll say, but wait, I asked for the benefits to start on August 1st. And MassHealth will say, well, no, we don't think you were under your 160, your 162,000 until November 1st. And so that's when we're going to start your benefits. But now you're in the nursing home. How are you going to pay for August, September, and October? Because you're down to, you're under your asset limits. Your spouse is under their asset limits, and now they have to pay $20,000 a month because MassHealth won't give you the start date you wanted. So you have to appeal the start date too, even though it looks like it might, you're getting benefits. That start date is very important. And properly timed spend down process. We have to. It's a strategy that we set out ahead of time about how we're going to qualify somebody and when we're going to do certain spend downs, and how we get down to that 2,000 and the 162, and you just have to structure it right. And just know that, the MassHealth application for long-term care in a nursing home. So again, there's many different MassHealth programs. There's MassHealth programs for people who live in the community, for people who are indigent, for MassHealth programs for children, but every MassHealth program has different eligibility rules. We're just talking today about MassHealth eligibility for people who need to move to a long-term care facility to live because they're not, they're too ill to be able to stay at home independently anymore. So this particular type of MassHealth, it's not like, you fill out an application or you apply online for, Tufts insurance. This MassHealth insurance is it's a legal process, and they have attorneys on their side who are reviewing applications and doing these fair hearings when there's a problem and you have to go to a hearing. So you really need to pay attention to the MassHealth regulations, which is, we have a very thick volume of regulations that we refer to all the time when working on these cases. And it's, the point is you want to avoid getting denied. So before
Christine,
we get into this.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say that's a really good point, because it is a much more complicated process than you would think. It is a full legal process, like you said. They have attorneys. It's best that you have an attorney as well. And I know that we're almost at the end here, because we do want to make sure there's some time for questions. But I think this next point that you have is super important, because I think the irrevocable aspect of planning can really scare off some people. So I'm really excited to touch base on this particular topic.
Great. So, and I agree, this is a really important topic. So this is at the beginning of the presentation, I said irrevocable income, we're doing advanced planning. So more than 5 years in advance. So this trust is our sort of gold standard for protecting real estate. So the 5-year look back applies. So you have to set up this trust and put your house into this trust more than 5 years before the date that one of you needs to apply for Medicaid. So that means while you're still healthy, or both of you, if you're married, are still healthy, and you think, oh, we don't need a nursing home, that's the time to do this trust. This will hold the primary residence. It can hold a vacation home as well. The assets in the trust are not countable assets for MassHealth eligibility if you make the 5 years. MassHealth does not look at them as being your asset because now they're owned by your trust and they're not owned by you. So in order to make that complete separation between you and the trust, the person who creates the trust, which would be the applicant and the applicant's spouse, cannot be the trustee. So people will normally name a trustworthy child or a niece or a nephew to be that trustee. And the main benefit that the donor or the creator of this trust is going to receive from the house is the ability to live in it for the rest of their life, or to rent it out if they need to, if they're going to go, say, to an assisted living or something, and keep the net rents, which is called the right to income. So we put real estate in here because it's the perfect type of asset for this kind of trust, because the only benefit you really want from it is to be able to live in it. If we have a couple where this is their only asset and they don't have any other assets to tap for their support during their lifetime, we would think twice about this kind of trust because they may need it. They may need the equity to get the equity, take out a home equity loan for their support. But if we look at the assets and we say, okay, you're a healthy couple, every possibility of making 5 years, you've got a couple of IRAs, you've got some CDs, you got other money. Let's put this house in the trust because you're not going to need to tap the equity. The only thing you need from this trust is to live in it. So once the house goes into the trust, then it can't come back to the donor if you want to protect the house. It's got to stay in the trust. You can't get a home equity loan on it because then you're accessing the principal, and this trust will prohibit you from accessing the principal. So you only have the right to income, the right to live in it, or the right to keep the net rents if it's rented. If you had the right to principal, MassHealth and then you had to apply for MassHealth, I'd say, great, sell your house, take the proceeds, spend them down at $20,000 a month on your care, and when you're out of money, then we apply for MassHealth and we'll cover you. So that's why you can't have access to principal, because the point is you want to preserve this asset so you can pass that wealth to the next generation. And that is why we do this trust, because it helps you qualify at the beginning if you make the 5-year look back. And then at the end, there is no estate recovery by MassHealth. So did you know that if you're a MassHealth recipient and you're in a nursing home and you have an asset that's in your name when you die, which is commonly, a house like this, especially if the owner is just an single individual, not a married couple. If you have a house in your name when you die and you've been on Medicaid in a nursing home, they will file a claim in the probate court, force a sale, and then they will get repaid for the amount that they spent for your time in the nursing home from the proceeds of the sale, which will significantly impact the amount of that money that you're going to be able to transfer to the next generation. Sometimes people are in for a couple years, so maybe it's a couple $100,000, but there's people who are in there for many years, and then the whole value of the house can just, end up being part of the repayment to MassHealth. So that's why this planning is important, because it will prevent that from happening. There is no grab back, full recovery by MassHealth with this trust in place. Oops. All right. So just one more quick slide. Why is it not? There we go. All right. So here's a quick little story. You can look at it in your own time, but basically it explains how a married couple with a good amount of assets can qualify for Medicaid. So we've got a married couple, both in their late 70s, Social Security, their only form of income. The house is $800K. They've got a $400K IRA, $240,000 in CDs, a couple of bank accounts, and a car. So one of them needs to go to a nursing home. So in order to get into a good facility, the husband's agreed he's going to pay privately for about 6 months to get the spouse into a good quality facility. And he starts preparation of the application. Elder law attorney gets on board, has the husband deed the jointly owned home to him alone, because wife can't qualify for Medicaid if she has the house in her name. So even though she has dementia and she can't sign the deed, she has a power of attorney. And she names him as her agent. He uses that to transfer the house to himself. So make sure everybody has a power of attorney. Very important. He also spends money on the house because he's living in the house. So he spends some of the money down on a new roof, windows, central AC. And what he does is he gets the money down. So she's under 2,000 in her account, and now he's under 160,000. So between her private pay in the nursing home and fixing up the house, he's got himself under that $162,000 asset limit, and she's under her 2,000. But he's still got this IRA. So that was the liquid money spent down, but he's got this IRA. So he's going to, because they didn't do advanced planning. So he's going to take this IRA and he's going to use it to purchase a single premium immediate annuity, special kind of annuity you would not use for any other reason other than qualifying for Medicaid because you need to generate income for yourself. So he buys this annuity and he converts that 400,000, which is disqualifying. She would not get onto Medicaid if he owns that. And now he's getting it back every month in a stream of income. And MassHealth says, oh, that's okay because the community spouse can have all their own income. So he then applies for MassHealth. They're under their asset limits. From the day he purchases the annuity, he has 60 days for that first annuity payment to come back to him. So we got to get that MassHealth application in between the day he purchases the annuity and before that first payment comes back. Otherwise, he's going to be over assets again, most likely. So we get that application in that 60-day window. And then when MassHealth gets the application, they look at that, say, okay, he's under 162, she's under 2,000, and she's eligible. So, I mean, that's a simplified version of it, but there could definitely be other problems when MassHealth looks at bank statements, but that's kind of how we take a couple that looks like they might have too much money for MassHealth, but they don't. We can qualify them. So these are just some key takeaways. So I'm just going to end it here. I know I'm a little bit over, but take it away.
No, you're good, Christine. You actually only have a couple of questions that came in, which is nice. So one of the things, and you did touch on this kind of briefly, is that the subject of gifting. Someone had asked, they said that they have $19,000 per year, which is the current gift limit without having to file a gift tax return. They give it currently to each of their kids, their children's spouses, and their grandkids each year. And they wanted to do that again this year, but you mentioned that you can't give money to kids and still qualify for MassHealth, but gifting is allowed. So do you mind repeating kind of what you said about trying to appeal, like this sort of history of gifting and why that could still be permitted while you're trying to qualify for eligibility?
Sure. So we're looking at, this person is looking at two different sets of rules. So we have the IRS, which has rules that say you can gift $19,000 a year to your children, any family members, right? Their spouses. If you're trying to especially kind of reduce the size of your assets because of, the impending estate tax, you maybe want to reduce your assets, you can do that. And that's all okay. And you don't have to, file a gift tax return for that. But the IRS rules are different from MassHealth rules. So MassHealth will look at that situation and they don't see allowable gifting by the IRS. What they see is somebody trying to give away money to make themselves poor so they can qualify for MassHealth. And so those IRS rules don't apply for a Medicaid spend down. And the Medicaid spend down rules say you can't make gifts like that. That definitely gifts of $19,000 to each of the kids and the spouses and the grandkids, that's going to cause a very large penalty period. So we do advise, once couples get to the point where they're healthy now, but they could see that maybe in 5 or 6 years, somebody, may decline, or maybe they're getting into their 80s and who knows what's going to happen. So maybe the time for gifting is over at that point, and you want to do that gifting before you get to that period of time. If you're the kind of person that's sort of in that middle income where it's likely you're going to need Medicaid to pay for your nursing home care, you want to stop that gifting at a certain point if you've got Medicaid eligibility on your goals.
Perfect. We do have a couple more questions, but this webinar is actually scheduled to end in 1 minute. So apologies that we can't get to all of the questions today. With everyone's permission, we can go ahead though and reach out to you privately regarding your questions and concerns. However, next week, Christine will be back with us on May 20th at 1 p.m. hosting another informational session on estate planning. So if you do have additional questions regarding irrevocable trusts, revocable trusts, powers of attorney, etc., that would be a really great session to join. And the following week on May 27th, we'll have another session as well at 1 p.m. regarding gifting and particularly charitable gifting, but also gifting strategies to family members as well. So we want to again thank you all for your time today. And we will get back to those who have asked some questions privately with ways to reach us. Christine, if anyone wants to connect with your office, what is the best way for them to do so?
So I think my contact information is on the first slide, so I'll just put it right there. So there's my email address, and I am in the Worcester office of Myrick.
Perfect. And for those who know Bickling Financial Services, you know we can be reached at 781-862-9792. And for those who do not know us, feel free to go to bickling.com and feel free to fill out a form and we can be in touch. Thank you all so much for your time. And we hope to have this recorded version of this out for distribution in just a couple weeks. But thank you all. Enjoy the day. And we hope to see you next week. Thanks again.
Thank you.